Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Revelation class. For those of you joining us at home through YouTube or through Facebook, welcome. We're delighted to have you here. We hope that this class will be wonderful and beneficial to you. We're teaching Revelation. We are in class number 71. We started this back in 2021, and we're in the third of a 6-week summary class. We did 68 weeks of just going verse by verse, word by word through Revelation. We completed that, and now we're in the middle of a 6-week summary class to summarize Revelation. And the title of this class, the subtitle of this class, is God's Plan for Man. It's based on a phrase that Jesus uses 3 times in the book of Revelation. He says, "I am the Alpha and I am the Omega." And Alpha is the first letter in the Greek alphabet, and Omega is the last letter in the Greek alphabet. And Jesus goes further if we don't understand it, and he says, "I am the first and the last," with most of those as well. So what he's telling us is that he was there at the beginning of God's plan for man, and he is there, and he will be there at the end of God's plan for man. Of course, God's plan for man is contained in here. That's the number of purposes to the Bible, but one of them is to lay out God's plan for man to us. So God's plan of man begins, as the Bible does, in Genesis 1, chapter 1, with the creation of the universe. It goes on in Genesis 1:27 to the creation of man. And then it goes on through the Old Testament, through Moses and the calling of the Jews through Abraham. And it goes on through the prophets of the Old Testament. And it goes on through Jesus coming to save us, coming to go up on the cross and die for us and rise for us. And then just a few days after he ascended into heaven, the church age started at Pentecost. So it goes through Pentecost, and it's gone now through 2,000 years of the church age, from Pentecost until now. At some point soon, the church age will end. We don't know when, but Revelation tells us it will be soon. That's the word to choose. So at some point soon, the church age will end, the rapture will come, and God's church will come off the earth. And Jesus said that it would be like as it was in the days of Noah, and that it would be like it was in the days of Lot. And remember the story of Noah. There was so much sin on the earth that God was about to punish the earth with a flood. But before he did, he took the righteous people, which was Noah and his family, off the earth. Took them away, not off the earth, but out of the flood in a boat. And then he did the same thing with Lot. And just in case we missed that story, he did the same thing with Lot. Sodom and Gomorrah was incredibly sinful, and God was getting ready to destroy it. But before he destroyed it, he took Lot and Lot's daughters out of it and got them out of town before the fire and brimstone came down. It's going to be the same way with us. And Jesus tells us that. He tells us that in Matthew, and he tells us that in Luke. So what we've done now up to this point, Revelation, by the way, is the story out here. It's the story from the church age, which we've completed in a previous week, to the rapture, to the tribulation, and then off into some parts that we'll talk about eventually of the period after that, the millennial kingdom and the eternal state, the final state that we will end up in heaven. So that's the story that's in Revelation. It is the conclusion of the Bible. So as Genesis was the first book of the Bible, Revelation is the last book of the Bible. It is the completion of God's plan for man, which is why I picked that title for the class. Now, last week we got all the way through Revelation 4:1, which was the rapture. So we're through the rapture at this point. And then today we're going to go from Revelation 4:2 through Revelation 12:17. And this is the first half of the tribulation, the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. The tribulation, by the way, is going to be a 7-year period that's going to happen when the Antichrist will come to power over the earth. So we have the first 3.5 years. And then next week we're going to look at the midpoint of the tribulation. And then we're going to look at the second half of the tribulation next week. But this week we're going to be looking at the first half of the tribulation. So let's start in Revelation 4:4. This is immediately after the rapture. In Revelation 4:4, we see that the elders are in heaven and they are seated on thrones. Well, in order to be seated, now bear in mind, people who die today and go to heaven go there in spiritual form. The Bible tells us that. They don't have bodies yet. They don't get bodies until the rapture. So if these if these elders are seated in heaven, that means they have a body. I don't know how a spirit can sit down, but that means they have a body in my mind. So they're seated on thrones, and it goes on to tell us that, so presumably they've gotten their heavenly bodies, which means the rapture has occurred, which it did in 4:1, a couple of verses earlier. It also says that they are dressed in white. Being dressed in a white robe is a symbol in the Bible. We see it in a whole bunch of places, a lot of it in Revelation, but also Paul talks about it, that when we get to eternal glory, we will get our white robes from God. So they have their white robes already. So they are in eternal glory. They have their white robes. They also have crowns of gold on their head. In order to wear a white robe, you need a body, right? A spirit can't wear a white robe. I don't think so. In order to put a crown on your head, you need a head. And again, you need a body to do that. So it appears as though they have now received their heavenly bodies, which is the rapture. That's what happens at the rapture. We went through that passage from Paul to the Thessalonians 2 weeks ago that we looked at, or I'm sorry, last week, where we looked at how we will get our eternal bodies at the rapture. Another thing is in Revelation 4:10, we see that these elders are falling down in front of the throne and worshiping God and putting their crowns on the ground in front of God and offering those to him. Well, when you think about that, how do you fall down without a body? How do you take your crown and push it forward to God without a body? All of that seems to imply that they have their bodies at this point. So it appears as though the rest of chapter 4 is the scene right after the rapture in heaven. It is also a beautiful worship, beautiful worship chapter in the Bible. Some beautiful worship in there. Much of it we use in our Christian liturgy. Some of the things from the Hallelujah chorus come from there. So there's some beautiful worship going on in there. And John is in heaven. He's actually seeing this occur in heaven. Now, as we get into chapter 5, we're looking at something that's happening just immediately after the rapture in heaven. We have this scene in the throne room with the elders and all the angels and the Father and the Son, the scene in the throne room. The rapture's now occurred. We are presumably there as well in the throne room if we've been raptured, if we've chosen Christ in this life. We are there. So we are now there in the throne room, and the Father has a scroll in his hand. And the scroll is what's going to happen in the tribulation. And he's looking to what he's going to do with, not looking, he knows what he's going to do, but the angels are saying, who can take the scroll from the Father's hand? And they say the only person who can take the scroll from the Father's hand is the Lamb. And the Lamb, of course, is Jesus, the Son. That just reminds me that I never shut my phone off this morning. Pardon me. Sorry about that. Usually I leave it in my coat, but this morning I didn't bring one. So the Father prepares to hand the scroll to his Son, to Jesus. And Jesus is the only one who has the ability to open the scroll, to open the tribulation. So Jesus controls when the tribulation begins. Remember, the Father controlled when the rapture occurs, but Jesus controls when the tribulation begins because he's holding the scroll, and he's the one who controls that. The scroll is important to the tribulation. Now, the tribulation is going to go on for 7 years. How do we know that? Daniel tells us that in Daniel 9:27. That was written, by the way, about 650 years before John wrote Revelation. So 650 years before John writes Revelation, Daniel tells us the tribulation period is going to go on for 7 years, for 77, or the 70th 7-year period. Now, this scroll that Jesus receives from the Father has 7 seals on it. Let me just kind of draw this up here for you. So if this is a scroll, again, pardon my artwork, I don't claim to be an artist. It's got 7 seals. There's kind of a part on there. It's got 7 seals over the flap of the scroll, kind of like the way you'd seal an envelope, maybe. And in the old days in John's time, we didn't have books yet. We didn't have, and, things were handwritten on scrolls. And when you made an agreement with somebody, you signed that agreement on a scroll. You wrote it out on a scroll and by hand, signed it on a scroll, and then you sealed it. Everybody put their seals on that. So this seal that the Father is handing Jesus the scroll that the Father is handing Jesus has 7 seals on it. The first thing Jesus has to do is break the 7 seals. So that is and the point at which he breaks the first seal is the beginning of the tribulation. And that happens in chapter 6. So we are now in Revelation chapter 6, verse 1. At that point, Jesus breaks the first seal. The first seal, when Jesus breaks the seal, he uses the word come. And come means the Antichrist is coming out into the world at that point. He is coming out into the world. And the first seal is the first 4 seals, by the way, are the famous 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So the first seal, the Antichrist rides out on a white horse. Now, what do we think of the guy who rides out on the white horse, right? He's the good guy. He's the hero. The Lone Ranger rode out on a white horse. If you're not my age, you might not know who the Lone Ranger was. But the Lone Ranger rode out on a white horse. George Washington rode a white horse during the American Revolution. There were other people who rode white horses at various times who were great leaders. There are also some fake leaders who ride white horses, like Saddam Hussein rode a white horse to try to pretend that he was a great, wonderful leader. So there are other people who pretend to ride white horses, or ride white horses to pretend to be great leaders. That's what the Antichrist is going to be. The Antichrist is going to come out as a fake. He's a fake of Jesus. He is a fake of a great leader coming into the world. Later on in chapter 19, we will see Jesus come out riding a white horse. So the real hero of the Bible will come out in chapter 19. That's a couple of weeks from now, riding a white horse. But the Antichrist comes out here riding a white horse. And it says that he is bent on conquest. So at this point, he's just coming to power, right? He hasn't conquered anything yet. He intends to conquer the world. So we don't know exactly how he's going to conquer the world. The Bible gives us a few hints, but we don't know exactly how he's going to conquer the world. We know that one of the things he will have to do is he's going to have to bring Israel over to his side. And we're not exactly sure how that's going to happen. There are a number of references to that in the Old Testament, that the Antichrist will seduce Israel to follow him. We also know that by the time we get to the midpoint in the tribulation, 3.5 years later, Israel will have built a new temple in Jerusalem. So during that first half of the tribulation, Israel is going to build a new temple in Jerusalem. So presumably the Antichrist will be involved in winning Israel's heart by brokering that deal in some way. We don't know how, but presumably he'll be involved in that. Not necessarily, but probably. So he's coming out, and he's on his horse. He's wearing a crown. But let's be careful of the word crown. There are 2 types of crowns. There is a diadem, which is the crowns that we are wearing back in chapter 4. Remember those gold crowns that we pushed on the floor to God? That is a diadem. A diadem is an inherited crown. It's a crown like a king gets from his father when his father passes away. Jesus got that crown from his father. We get that crown from Jesus. So it's a diadem, which is and that is a Greek word for a crown. It is an inherited crown. It is a legitimate crown. Now, there is a second kind of crown also, which in English we translate both of these as crowns. Again, one of them is a diadem. We translate that as a crown, but it's an inherited crown. It's a legitimate crown. The other is a Stephanos. This is another Greek word. I left something out there. This is another Greek word. A Stephanos is the kind of crown that a victor gets when he wins something. So if you think back, I don't know how many of you remember the 2004 Olympics. They were in Greece. And at the 2004 Olympics, when you won your gold medal, you not only got your gold medal, but you got a Stephanos. You got a laurel wreath crown that you wore. That says that you won. You were the best. You won a gold medal. So a Stephanos is something that you earn by conquering, by winning, by beating somebody else. That's a Stephanos. The Antichrist is not riding out like with a diadem, which is what we had earlier in chapter 4. He's coming with a Stephanos, which means he is conquering, he is winning. That's the kind of crown he's wearing. So be careful. Both of these translate to English as crown, but they are in fact very different concepts. So your English translation is just going to say he's wearing a crown, but it's really, you have to look at the actual Greek word that's behind that. So the Antichrist is coming out in the first seal judgment. Then it goes on in chapter 6 to the second seal judgment. In the second seal judgment, it's opened by Jesus, and the Antichrist now comes out on a red horse. Red horse is a horse of war, and it says that right in chapter 6. So the Antichrist presumably is going to bring a massive war to the earth. If you think about it, this will probably be a war unlike any we've ever seen. If you think about it, he plans to conquer the entire earth. That's what his Stephanos is. He's going to conquer the entire earth. It says he's bent on conquest. In order to conquer the entire earth, you think people are just going to hand it over and say, "Here, Antichrist, take my kingdom"? Probably not, right? He's probably going to have to get into some wars to do that. And in this day and age, if you get into wars that threaten people enough, those wars could turn nuclear. So it's possible that this could be a nuclear war, but it's clear it will be a massive war that the Antichrist will be kicking off when he comes out. Then Jesus opens the third seal on the scroll. So we're now 3 seals into the scroll. And the third seal, the Antichrist comes out on a black horse. And the black horse, it talks about it being related to commerce and corrupt commerce and inflation. It talks about how the prices of things you buy are going up, up, up. And that really has 2 things that it's talking about there. One is corruption and the other is famine, okay? The Antichrist is obviously going to be extremely corrupt. He's a totally sinful person. So as he consolidates power, that corruption will go out. And we see that in our world today. As people consolidate power, one of the things they do is get corruption out to their buddies and pals and friends, right? They get money and resources out to their friends. We see that all over the world today. Of people who consolidate power, they frequently use that to reward their friends and to reward themselves, obviously. And as that happens, where does those resources come from? They come from the poor, obviously. The poor are the people who are getting hurt by this. And we also see, as we read that passage of the third seal judgment, that the prices of everything is going up, up, up. It talks about the prices of a quart of this, and it talks about the prices of grain and stuff going up in that judgment. That is what we call inflation. In the last couple of years, we've seen a fair amount of that, right? So we're getting a sense of what inflation is. And inflation is when corruption essentially comes into our pricing system, as it has been over the last few years. So what that can produce is the combination of those 2, corruption and inflation, and by the way, war, can produce famine. There's probably not enough food being produced anymore. What is being produced is being bid up in price through corruption, and the people who are buying it are the people who have the money, and those are the people that are in power. So that's corruption. So it all kind of comes together, and we're probably looking at significant famine in the world, and that's what it says in that particular part of chapter 6. Then Jesus opens the 4th seal. When he opens the 4th seal, the Antichrist comes out on a pale horse. Now actually, we translate it as a pale horse, but the Greek word is chronos for that, and chronos is a deathly green color. It's the color of a decomposing body. It's kind of a pale greenish color. It's the color of a decomposing body. So it's talking about death. Okay, so the pale horse is the horse of death, and as the Antichrist consolidates his rule, people are dying. They're dying from the war. They're dying from the plague. They're dying from famine. Plagues like what we just saw here a couple of years ago presumably will be running during this period as well. Who knows if there'll be biological warfare or where that's all going to come from. But it says that 1/4 of the earth's people are going to die during this war and during this famine and during this corruption. So 1/4 of the earth's people are going to die. So if you're doing the math, we know that a lot of people have already gone from the earth in the rapture, a lot of people, and now 1/4 of the people that were left are gone. So the population of the earth is coming down during this period. So these first 4 judgments are now over, and those first 4 judgments are the Antichrist consolidating power, and it's all brought about by him and his people, the people that are around him. From here on in, as we continue on, the judgments aren't coming from the Antichrist anymore. They're coming directly from God himself, and we'll see that as we continue on. Now the 5th seal shows the martyrs under the throne of God. Now they are in spirit form. It's very clear that they are in spirit form. They do not have a body yet. So the church got a body at the rapture. The martyrs are in heaven, but they're in heaven in spirit form. It's very clear in the 5th seal judgment. And they're up there under the altar, kind of quivering under the altar and saying, Lord, when are you going to avenge our death? Now these are martyrs that are martyred during the tribulation, during the first half of the tribulation. These are people who are martyred. Now, you might ask, well, to be martyred, you have to come to faith, right? And how did they come to faith? Well, we're going to get to that. That has to do with 144,000 Jews. But John can't cover everything at once, so that comes in another couple of in the next chapter. So we'll get to that shortly of how they came to faith. But the key point here is that huge numbers of people will be converted more than any during this period, during this first 3.5 year period. Huge numbers of people will be converted to Christ, way more than have probably ever been created in one period before in history. So it's going to happen, but most of those people will be martyred. The Antichrist is not going to tolerate accepting Christ. Very clear. So most of those people will be martyred. So Jesus opens the 5th seal, and people, the martyrs are under the throne. By the way, this is a pretty good reason not to wait until the tribulation to accept Christ, right? If you'd prefer not to be martyred, and most of us probably would, that's a good reason to accept Christ now and to make that decision for Christ now. And for those of you watching at home, if you haven't accepted Christ, or anyone here in the class, if you haven't accepted Christ now, please do so. Jesus said the rapture could come at any moment. We don't know. He says it's coming soon. Those words are actually in, that is actually in Revelation. So make that decision for Christ soon, because you don't know when he's coming back. And once the rapture occurs, from there on in, your route to heaven is still open, but your route to heaven involves converting during the tribulation, and it involves probably martyrdom, almost certainly martyrdom. And if you prefer not to be martyred, choose him now. Jesus opens the 6th seal now. When the 6th seal is opened, a great earthquake comes to earth, a massive earthquake. This is, we hear about, 7.8s and 9.1s and whatever, all these different, this is like a 20 or something. This is an earthquake that's going to level all the mountains on earth, will be brought down to level. And all the islands on earth will disappear, right? There'll be no more islands on earth. In addition to that, the sun is going to become black for a while. Not permanently, but for a while, so which means it gives off no heat. Well, people very quickly are going to get very cold here on Earth if there's no sun. I mean, the temperature on Earth would drop within a matter of hours, within a matter of days, would drop tremendously if the sun weren't shining anymore. So this is all going to happen. People are going to start going into caves, and when they go into caves, the earthquakes are going to hit them, and caves are not going to be a good place to be in an earthquake. So people are going to be, these are people who haven't been martyred, and people who didn't get out of here on the rapture are going to have a very, very difficult time when this judgment hits. We don't know how many of them are going to die. The Revelation doesn't tell us, but presumably it will be another large number that will die. At this point, they can still seek God, but most of them have chosen to stay in sin, and so God is essentially putting this on people who've chosen to stay in sin. That is the 6th seal. Now in chapter 7, we take a little break here from the seals. God selects 144,000 Jews, 12,000 Jews from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, 144,000 Jews. And he seals them, different kind of seal now. He seals them for ministry. And they're going to go out and evangelize the world. As I said, this is going to be the greatest period of evangelization the world has ever seen. These 144,000 Jews, this will happen at the beginning of the first half of the tribulation. These 144,000 Jews will spend 3.5 years running around the earth, evangelizing people and helping people to convert. So people will be converted. As they convert, they're going to be martyred very soon, but they will convert and they will understand that. Next thing John sees is he sees a huge multitude in front of the throne of God. And they are, and he tells us that this multitude are the people who were martyred during the tribulation. So think about it, right? The fifth seal judgment told us the martyrs were under the throne in spirit form. Now all of a sudden they're standing there with real bodies. They have white coats on, they have crowns. So they have received their heavenly bodies, just like we did at the rapture. They have now received their heavenly bodies, and they're standing in front of the throne of God. So this part is now happening at the end of the first half of the tribulation. All these people have been converted by the 144,000 Jews. They have chosen Christ. They have been martyred for their faith. And they are now standing in front of the throne of God in their heavenly bodies. So they have received their heavenly bodies. They have been raptured, if you will. They've received their heavenly bodies in the same way that we did. And they are wearing white coats, and they are wearing crowns, just like we were in the earlier scene back in chapter 4. So at this point, the martyrs now, are pretty much complete, and they have received their reward. They have received their heavenly body, and they're standing there. And by the way, God assures them that they will be with him forever at that point. Just like he assured us back in chapter 4 that we will be there forever. So now let's move on to chapter 8. In chapter 8, Jesus opens the seventh seal, the final seal on the scroll. When he opens the final seal on the throne, on the scroll, the judgment that comes out is so severe that there's silence in heaven for half an hour. Remember, John's in heaven watching this. He's not here on earth. He's watching Jesus doing this in heaven. So he's watching the tribulation unfold from heaven. So there's silence in heaven for half an hour. An angel holding a censer stands at the altar. Now remember, I didn't actually say this, but in front of the throne of God is an altar, a sacrifice altar, where Jesus laid his sacrifice in front of the Father. During that 3 days when he was in the tomb, Jesus went up and laid his sacrifice in front of the Father, the sacrifice that he had just done on the cross, on the altar in front of the Father. So that altar is there. Altars in the Jewish liturgy have fire on them. So there's fire on that altar. This angel has a censer. I don't know how many of you know what a censer is. Luckily, I was an altar boy once when I was in the Catholic Church way back a few years ago. And a censer, I got to see them. A censer is a gold-plated thing that has holes in it, and we used to put charcoal in it and light it and get it lit, and then there was a way that the priest could pick it up, and he would put incense on top of it, and as the incense hit the charcoal, this smoke would come out, this incense smoke, and he would bless people with the incense. And it was on a chain, so he could hold it up here so he didn't get burned, and hold the chain and bless people as he went around with it. That's a censer. As I said, the Catholic Church still uses them today. They still use them in their liturgy today. I actually was involved when I was doing that with lighting censers and handing them to the priest and that kind of stuff. But that is a censer. And basically what it says here is that the angel, this is a different angel now, not one of the 7 angels we've already seen. This is a new angel now. The angel takes the censer, goes and takes the fire, not charcoal now, but takes the fire from the altar in front of God, puts it in there, puts the incense in. The incense is the prayers of the saints. And I didn't mention this, but back in chapter 5, when the martyrs were under the altar praying that God would avenge them, that's what they were praying for, that God would avenge them against the people who had done this to them, who had martyred them. Well, at this point, God is about to, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. This is the point where God will do that. So their prayers are the incense that goes into the censer, and the angel then takes the censer and hurls it at the earth. This is at the beginning of chapter 8. So at this point, the vengeance of God is coming to the earth because they martyred his people. That's what's about to happen here in chapter 8. The vengeance of God is coming on the earth. That's what's happening here. If anybody has any questions, I'm going through this kind of fast. Feel free to stop me. Now, what happens then is there are peals of thunder, there's lightning, there's another huge earthquake, and at this point, Jesus unrolls the scroll. The seals are off, so now Jesus can unroll the scroll, and what's in there? 7 angels come out with 7 trumpets, come out of the next part of the scroll. He will continue to unroll the scroll as we go through here. Yes, Deb's pointing something out to me. In the back of your handout is this chart. I did not create this chart. I found this, my beautiful wife found this on the internet. Let me give credit where credit is due. It's written by a guy by the name of Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum, and I do not know him. But I've looked at it pretty carefully, and it's probably 98% something that I would teach. So I looked at it, and I said, okay, I'm going to bring this in. But it gives you an idea of how this first half of the tribulation unfolds with the 7 seal judgments and then the 7 trumpet judgments. So we're now, I should have probably pointed this out to you earlier, but it is on the back of your handout. And by the way, the other side of that is the chart that we've used since the first day of this class, of this 6-week class, which is God's plan for man. And we are now in this period here. We are in the period from the rapture through the first half of the tribulation, heading for the midpoint. So that's where we are on these 2 charts. So this is stuff you can look at as you're just kind of going through what we're looking at. Thank you, Deb. Okay, so we now have 7 angels with 7 trumpets that have come out in front of the throne of God. And the first angel sounds his trumpet. And when he does, the next judgment occurs. Each of these trumpets is a judgment. That's what this whole scroll is. It's 14 judgments. There's 7 judgments on the seals. There's 14 more judgments inside the scroll. So, I'm sorry?
7 more judgments inside the scroll. You said 14.
Yeah, well, the bowl judgments are in there too. I'm going to get to that part later.
Okay.
That's the second half of the tribulation. But for today's purposes, there are 7 trumpet judgments in there. So the first angel sounds his trumpet, and hail, fire, and blood rain down on the earth. 1/3 of the trees are burned up, making them uninhabitable, and all the grass on earth is burned up. So a hail of fire is burning down on the earth, kind of like what hit Egypt during the plagues of Egypt, right? By the way, a lot of these relate back to the plagues of Egypt. If you go back, I don't have time to go through all the plagues of Egypt with you. I did that in the original class, but if you look at that, you'll see that many of these plagues are much bigger versions of what hit Egypt back in Moses' time. That's what God did to Egypt. He's now doing to the Antichrist's world down here. So all this fire is burning down and things are burning up on the earth. 1/3 of the earth is burned up. That makes it uninhabitable, right? So 1/3 of the earth is uninhabitable. And presumably the people on that 1/3 of the earth are probably gone here as well. We'll find out later that they are as we go a little further into this. The second angel sounds his trumpet, and a huge mountain of fire falls out of the sky and falls into the ocean. And when it falls into the ocean, it kills 1/3 of the sea creatures and turns 1/3 of the sea into blood. It also kills 1/3 of the ships at sea, or not kills, destroys 1/3 of the ships that are at sea. So all of a sudden, 1/3 of our seas, 1/3 of our land around the world is gone, it's burned up, and 1/3 of our seas are turned into blood. So the world is getting smaller now, and the population's obviously getting smaller as all this is happening as well. Then the third angel sounds his trumpet, and a great fiery star falls from heaven. Now, a fallen star in Scripture is another phrase for a fallen angel. So a fallen star, and a fallen angel is either Satan or his minions, who we call demons. So when you see the term in Scripture, a fallen star, we're talking about a demon. We're not talking about a literal star falling and hitting the earth. We're talking about a demon is coming down here to earth. So a demon is coming down, and this particular demon has a name, and his name is Wormwood. He falls out of the sky, and he turns a third of the fresh water on earth bitter. In other words, a third of the fresh water is now destroyed. It's still there, but you can't drink it, you can't use it for your crops, you can't do anything with it. So a third of all the fresh water on the earth is now gone, because this demon has come down to the earth and done that. The fourth angel sounds his trumpet. A third of the sun, moon, and stars are struck, so they become dark. Now, how do you strike a third of the sun or a third of the moon? Basically, a third of the day has no light. It has no starlight, it has no moonlight, it has no sunlight. So of our 24-hour day, 8 hours of it has no light, right? God has just darkened the earth for that 8 hours in a day. Some of that's in the day, some is at night. So it's probably at the end of the day or the beginning of the day or whatever. But some of that will be in the day because the sun will be partially struck, and some of that will be at night because the moon and stars will be partially struck. So guess what? Things are going to get colder if the sun is not around as much as it is normally. Things will get colder on Earth. It's not going to be great to be here on Earth when that happens. After that, there's another interesting scene, an eagle. And this is an eagle that presumably has to be somehow visible to everybody on Earth. An eagle flies through the air telling people that the last 3 trumpet blasts are going to be even worse than the first 4. So everybody on Earth will hear this eagle. So it's not just one bird flapping around New Haven, Michigan. Or New Haven, Indiana. I'm sorry, I'm from Michigan. It's about an eagle that everybody can see everywhere. We don't know how that's going to happen, but God says it's going to happen, so it's going to happen. People will see this eagle flying around making this pronouncement that if you guys think the first 4 trumpets were bad, wait till you see the next 3, right? Okay, the 5th angel sounds his trumpet. And another star, by the way, there is a typo in there. It's demon is the next word. Another star, which again is a fallen angel or a demon, falls to the earth. This guy has been given the key to the shaft of the abyss. Now, the abyss is hell in the Bible. The abyss, you'll notice, is a capitalized term in here. So the abyss is hell. So he's given the key to hell. And we're told in a lot of places in the Bible that hell is inside the earth, someplace. We don't know where because it's a spiritual place. It's not a physical place. But he's given the key to hell to unlock that and open hell up so that hell now comes to earth. Isn't that lovely, right? Just imagine having hell getting turned loose on earth. Well, it's about to happen. He has the key. He unlocks it. When he unlocks it, he opens the shaft to the abyss, and smoke rises up, and that smoke turns into locusts. Joel told us all about locusts. Those of you that were in my Joel class a few years ago, remember we talked a lot about locusts. Locusts are nasty critters that kind of just come and eat up all the crops in a whole area and then move on. And they'll just come in like a big dark cloud of locusts. They'll land, and they'll move on because they've eaten anything green that's in there. And they just move on to the next place and do it again. That's what locusts do. So they'll come in like locusts, a dark cloud. They're going to darken the sun. They'll be that dark. And these really aren't actually locusts in terms of insects. These are evil demons. So a massive number of evil demons are going to come up from the earth, and they're going to come around the earth. They're only going to attack the sinners of the earth, and they're going to attack them like scorpions with stings. So that if you've ever seen a scorpion, and they'll be able to attack constantly for 5 months. So it's like being stung all the time for 5 months by a scorpion, right? Only there'll be zillions of them attacking. And they're only going to attack the sinners on the earth. So anyone who has chosen Christ at this point will be free of this. But the people who still have not chosen Christ, which is the vast majority of the earth, will get stung again and again and again for 5 months, and they're painful stings. And they say that the stings will be so painful that the people will just want to kill themselves, but they won't be allowed to. God will not let them kill themselves during this 5-month period. It's very clear in Revelation. You can't kill yourself during this 5-month period. These demons look like evil horses prepared for battle, and their leader has a name too. His name is Apollyon, and Apollyon is a Greek name. Then the 6th angel sounds his trumpet, and at that point 4 angels, these are fallen angels now, these are demons, are released at the river Euphrates. That's the river, by the way, that runs through Babylon. This is an evil river. Babylon is an evil place. So 4 demons have been held at this river since the time that the demons were, or that the angels were banished from heaven, the fallen angels. They've been there ever since then. They're just mad as heck. They can't wait to get out. They're angry. They've been released. God has kept them there, and they've been kept there for this particular time. They're going to be released. There are 200 million of them, and they are going to come around looking evil, breathing fire, and 1/3 of all the people on the earth will be slain by them. So again, the population is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, right? We lost people, hundreds of millions for the rapture. Then we lost 1/4 of the people on earth. That's almost 2 billion people from the wars. Then we lost more people from the cold and the earthquake. Then we lost 1/3 of the people in here. This is 1/3 of the people here. Oh, in addition to that, we had lost all the people that were martyred, which is hundreds of millions more. So, the population of the earth is getting smaller and smaller and smaller as we're going through this. If you aren't seeing that as we're going through, the number of people left on earth is getting small very rapidly. So 200 million of these people, of these demons, are running around slaying people, slaying sinners. They only slay sinners, killing sinners. And interestingly enough, you would think that the remaining people would say, all right, I've had enough, Lord, take me, take me. But they don't. That's not what they do. They keep right on sinning. So God's not done, right? If at any point they would all say, we accept you, Jesus, God would be done. But he's not done because they haven't done that. So now we're approaching the midpoint in the tribulation. In chapter 10, another angel comes down from heaven. And this is a different angel. It's different from the 7 angels with the trumpets. And he's a mighty angel. I assume he's big, and he works out like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he shouts with the roar of a lion. He's holding a little scroll in his hand. Now, we have actually seen this little scroll once before, way back in the book of Daniel. Daniel goes on through 12 chapters talking about all the revelations that God gives him. And in chapter 12, it's all on a little scroll. And Daniel is told by God, write it all down, but don't pass it on. And that scroll contains what will happen in the second half of the tribulation. And at that point, he presumably gives it to the angel. The angel tells him that. And the angel holds on to it from the time of Daniel, 630 BC, or 530 BC, until now, or whenever we are here at the midpoint. And here at the midpoint, the angel gives that scroll to Daniel. So Daniel now gives that scroll to John. So John, 650 years later, now has Daniel's scroll in his hands. The angel has given it to them. This is the details of what will happen in the second half of the tribulation. And the angel's shout sounds like 7 thunders. John listens to that thunder, and there's some new stuff in there. But John is told to seal that up, just like Daniel was told. John is told, seal that up and don't write that. So we don't know what those 7 thunders told John. Presumably it's something after the second half, someplace out in the future states. We don't know. We assume at some point God will reveal that to us, but he hasn't yet. But God has something that John has locked up now. He has written down, but locked up for the future, for some future time. Now, another great angel comes out. There are angels all over the place in Revelation, by the way. Another great angel, another big, strong, mighty angel comes out and swears by the Almighty that God's purposes, as given to the prophets, are about to be accomplished, and that will happen in the second half of the tribulation. The day of the Lord is finally going to happen. The time when God will severely punish the earth is going to happen. And he tells John to eat the scroll. So John eats the scroll. This is Daniel's scroll now. John eats Daniel's scroll, goes down into his stomach. John says the taste is sweet. So it's nice for John to know what's going to happen in the future, right? It's sweet. It's nice to know what's going to happen in the future. But when it hits his stomach, it's sour, because what's going to happen in the future is not pleasant. And John's going to see that or know that when it hits his stomach. John is then told to prophesy what is on the scroll. So John is now going to continue on into the second half of the tribulation and prophesy what Daniel wrote down way back when. John will now do that. Now in chapter 11, remember John's still in heaven. He's told to measure the altar, the one that's in front of, the altar which is in the new temple in Jerusalem, the temple that the Antichrist has built during the tribulation. So he's told to measure the temple. He's given a rod to do that with. That relates back to Ezekiel's rod in Ezekiel 39, I think it is, where Ezekiel has a rod to measure the temple in Jerusalem. This is a different temple. But this is a temple that was rebuilt during the first half of the tribulation. And in that temple, was rebuilt in a deal brokered by the Antichrist. That's in Daniel 9:27 also, by the way. That's a big verse in the Bible. So he's standing in Jerusalem, and John is told that the Gentiles will trample Jerusalem for 42 months. The Gentiles here are the Antichrist and his people, and he's talking now about the second half of the tribulation. So the Gentiles are going to be able to control Jerusalem for the last 42 months. The Gentiles being the Antichrist's people. So as the Antichrist by this point will have taken over Jerusalem and will be in the process of controlling it during that period. And Daniel said that would be 1,260 days. John says the same number here, interestingly enough. At that point, God sends two witnesses. God sent the two witnesses. Remember, John can't tell us everything at once. So God sent the two witnesses at the beginning of the first half. And during the first half, these two witnesses are supernatural beings. Many people think one of them is Elijah, because in the book of Malachi, God promises to send Elijah back at a time like this. Possible one of these may be Malachi. People speculate on the other. Some people speculate Moses. I don't know. But there will be two witnesses that God will send down, and they will prophesy for 42 months, for 3.5 years, the first half of the tribulation, at the temple in Jerusalem. So they will be up there day after day after day, preaching and teaching, just like Jesus did, at the temple in Jerusalem. Well, the Antichrist isn't going to be very thrilled about that, so he's going to try to kill them, right? But they're not killable. They can't be killed. These are supernatural people. They can't be killed. So anyone who tries to harm them will be devoured by fire. We don't know how that fire will strike them, whether it'll come down from heaven or whether they'll just poof, turn into cinders, or whether the people will breathe fire and hit them with fire like a flamethrower. I don't know how it's going to happen, but somehow they will be devoured by fire. And but after 42 months, their time will be done. For 42 months they have prophesied, and that will somehow be seen by people all around the world, because many people will be converted by watching these two witnesses, just like many people were converted by the 144,000 Jews. That will be some of the martyrs that will end up in here, will be converted by these two witnesses. But at the end of 42 months, these two witnesses will be allowed to be killed, and the Antichrist, the beast, will kill them at that point. At that point, their bodies will lay in the streets of the city of Jerusalem for 3 days. Anybody remember somebody else whose body laid around for 3 days? Guess what's going to happen after 3 days? They're going to be resurrected. Anybody remember somebody else whose body laid around for 3 days and then he got resurrected? So this is obviously a reference back to Jesus and the time period from the crucifixion to the resurrection. They will be resurrected. All of this will presumably be seen by people around the world. So maybe TVs are going to be taken over or something by God, and people will see this. I don't know how everybody's going to see this, but everybody in the world will see this, and these people will rise up and go up into heaven, just like Jesus ascended into heaven. So their time on earth will be done at that At this point, the seventh angel blows his trumpet, and we are now coming to the end of the first half. That is the last point of the first half. At that point, another great worship service occurs in heaven. Much of chapter 11 is about the, by the way, I said 12, this is actually 11, sorry. Chapter 11. We'll do 12 next week. But another great worship service occurs in heaven. Heaven opens at this point, and John sees the Ark of the Covenant. So all these people like Harrison Ford that have been out there trying to figure out what happened to the Ark of the Covenant, we now know it's in heaven, right? God took it to heaven way back when. So sorry, Harrison, but the Ark of the Covenant is in heaven, and it will be seen. And then on earth, guess what's going to happen? More lightning, more rumblings, more thunder, more earthquakes, and a great hailstorm. So again, judgments are striking the earth one last time as we get to the midpoint of the tribulation. And that's the end of the first half of the tribulation. We've kind of blown through this. It took me about 20 weeks to go through this at the class. Those of you that knew this, we've just done it in an hour. So we're now through the first half of the tribulation, and we're at the midpoint. So what we're going to cover next week is what happens at the midpoint of the tribulation. We've already talked about a few things. The 4 witnesses go up to heaven. The 144,000 Jews get killed. The people that were converted by them finally get out from under, and have been martyred, finally get out from under the altar and get their white coats and their crowns. So we've mentioned a few things that happen at the midpoint of the tribulation, but there's a lot more, and next week we're going to get into it. We'll see Satan come into the picture. We haven't heard much from Satan yet in all of Revelation, but he's going to become a key character starting in the second half. So next week we're going to get into that. And I got another minute left up there. Does anybody have any questions? We have covered a ton of stuff today. Okay, well, thank you for joining us, and thank you everyone at home for joining us. We wish you a good week. We hope you are getting an opportunity to see this online. If you're on Facebook, by the way, you can get the notes. Everybody in class has their notes that I pass out every week. You can get them on Facebook if you're following us on Facebook. And to do it on Facebook, you go to the Lifeway Wesleyan Church Facebook site, or to do it on YouTube, you go to the Lifeway Wesleyan Church YouTube site. So thank you again for joining us at home.